Brought to you by Brand South Africa.
Africa is on the brink of a major transformation. Over the last decade, the continent was home to 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies, and the outlook for the region remains bright at a time when the rest of the world is facing major political and economic challenges. However, attaining Africa's aspirations in a new global context will require bold and actionable ideas. The 2012 World Economic Forum on Africa is in its second day in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Bronwyn Nielson caught up with Clifford Sacks, the CEO of Renaissance Capital, and asked him what the key for investment into Africa by international banks is.
I think it depends how you define banks. I think the investment banks are strategically positioned generally, generally only in Johannesburg, by the way. We've got a hub model, so we've got 3 offices in the 3 hubs and a couple outside of them. The big retail banks, there's only one way in, and that's, I think, through acquisition, and I think you're starting to see those happen.
And that trend must be prevalent. If you look at the number of banks in each African country, we're looking at an average of between 20 and 30 across the continent in each country. There must be many acquisitions that international banks can come in and snap up.
They are. I think these are economies that are very, very high growth. Growth rates far in excess of ours and the rest of the developed world. It's our backyard, Africa, and I think our banks are able to come in and set up some pretty inexpensive acquisitions.
Well, let's look at the hot spots now. Oil, gas, mining, consumers are a big focus, and of course agriculture seems to be hot on the agenda right now. Renaissance Capital, where are you playing?
We have a slightly different agenda. As I said, from an investment banking perspective, we cover the continent. We have the hub model. Where do we put our own money is the question, and we put our own money almost exclusively into African land.
Now, African land, I'm assuming not from an agricultural perspective, otherwise you would have jumped on that theme as I came with it.
Correct. The theme that we play is master planning new cities. Now, if you think about Johannesburg 25 years ago, everyone was in the city centre. The city centre was crumbling, terrible traffic, horrible infrastructure, and someone had the foresight to develop Sandton. We are doing exactly that 15 k's north of Nairobi, a city called Tatu City. We're going to have our own municipality, reticulation, water, lights, the whole works. 65,000 people. It's going to be a work, live, play, offices, retail, everything. And if you've been in Nairobi, I was in Nairobi yesterday, it took me 2.5 hours to get from the airport to the hotel, and that's on an average day. If it's raining, forget about it.
Is this your first master city in play?
It is, yes, it is. And we've just turned ground. We've just turned our first clods of earth on Tatu.
Is it easier to do business in the East African community rather than looking at the Economic Commission of West African states?
I don't think so, because we've got a project pipeline, I think, of 8 of these developments. So we are doing this in Nigeria, in Ghana, right around the continent.
Are you focusing on land at the exclusion of those other hot industries, oil, mining, gas, consumers?
So we advise on those hot industries, as you call them. So we advise clients in the oil and gas industry, the metals and mining, financial services, fast-moving consumer goods. But where do we put our own money? Again, it's into this master plan of new cities. And it's a theme, by the way, that very few people are playing because it's expensive, very, very high barriers to entry, a long, long lead time. It takes a huge amount of resources, and it takes a lot of very, very specialist skills. So we've assembled, we think, a pretty crack team to do this across the continent. And you know, again, I think if you've been to Nairobi and you sit every day in the traffic, you probably sit on average 4 or 5 hours a day, seriously, getting to work and back in Westlands. It's an absolute nightmare. I
agree with you wholeheartedly. I've just recently been in Nairobi. Talking about Africa and the exciting growth opportunity, that is to a large extent dependent on globalization. And of course the dismal story coming out of the developed world, just very quickly your view on how you think that's going to affect the excitement behind the African story.
Look, I think Africa's a relative game. If Europe rolls over, it's going to hurt everyone. If China growth stalls, it's going to hurt everyone. But I think on a relative basis, you know, so Africa's not going to grow at 8, it's going to grow at 6. It's a lot better than close to 0 or negative growth in many other developed countries. So I think it's a relative game. Obviously, we'd like to see the world right itself and keep growing, because then I think we're going to just explode. But on a relative basis, I really would rather be here.